All right, thanks for coming. I'm really looking forward to all the talks we're going to hear today. Okay, so here are my collaborators, Shane, Nick, and Mike from Humboldt Redwood's company. Lee McDonald and Michelle have all played a big role in this research. So I'm going to give you a project overview and just talk about the different hypotheses we have, methods, and current status, and then some concluding remarks. So our goal is to evaluate the effectiveness of Humboldt Redwood Company's Habitat Conservation Plan, California Forest Practice Rules, and then Elk River Watershed Analysis derived prescriptions in minimizing sediment delivery to watercourses in response to a timber harvest. Here is our watershed, Railroad Gulch. It comes into the Elk River just below the confluence of the North Fork and the South Fork. So we're just a little bit ways south of the conference center. Here's the layout. It's really a perfect paired watershed, which really drew me into the study. So we have a west branch, which will be the control. Where's my cursor? And then an east branch that will have timber harvester, now has had it. The west branch is 366 acres, the east is 317, so really similar size. Clear cut and harvested with railroads, hence the name, in the 1900s, and then restocked and another round of harvest but in the 90s predominantly. Mostly redwood and dug for single-tiered, even aged. We're in a very erosive geology, so Hookton and Wildcat subject to shallow and deep-seated mass movements. The harvest will be 80 acres of single tree, 45 acres of group selection, and then 25 acres of riparian buffer, and then some harvest for construction of new road for the haul road. And then mostly cable yarding and some ground-based harvesting. So here's the timeline. Monitoring began in 2014, a little bit in 2013, and will run through 2019. So we have the road construction took place in summer of 15, and then the harvest has just completed this year. So we got good pre-data and then post-data to look at the behavior of the watershed. And we're hoping to have annual reports, master's theses, and publication coming from the work. So I'll talk about the different hypotheses, the different aspects we're looking at. One is looking at new or reconstructed road stream crossings. And so we're taking grab samples above and below during storm events at these locations. We'll also be looking at the road surfaces themselves. That's what Michelle's main job is to walk these roads, and for each segment of road, identify the condition, looking at rills, gullies, and then delivery and sediment plumes. One issue that has come up, no experiment is perfect. The haul road goes through a portion of the control watershed. And so the way we've responded to this is to rock the entire road with a really high quality gravel, which will minimize erosion off of that surface, and then install erosion control wattles and additional storm sampling stations to catch any impacts. We're hoping that won't throw off the results. The third hypothesis has to do with crossings. So this was an opportunity to evaluate sort of an age-old question of, is it better to leave a Humboldt crossing, so a legacy crossing where logs were thrown into the channel and fill was put on top instead of an actual culvert? Is it better to leave them in place or take them out and treat it? So we'll be taking grab samples for turbidity above and below at these sites. The fourth hypothesis has to do with landslides. This is an image of a landslide that took place in February 2015 when we had 3.7 inches of rainfall in just 2 days. So the hypothesis essentially that we won't have an increase in harvest-related landsliding within the harvest unit area. So we're mapping landslides using aerial photography and field inspection on an annual basis, and that work will continue. We're also looking at channel head migration. So here's a monumented channel head. The idea is that this is the end of the fluvial network, and so we'll measure exactly where that is each year. So here's a location of over 40 of those channel heads. And what we're getting at here is the idea that if you have a harvest and that results in increased overland flow, you can actually extend the fluvial network and have each of these tributary streams extend further up into the watershed. So this is a really sensitive indicator of any kind of change to the overland flow that's taking place. And to this point, they seem to be quite stable and not moving. But we haven't, of course, done any post-harvest inspection. Another thing we're looking at is streamside landslides. So this is showing one of those about 4 to 6 feet high, right adjacent to the channel. So after a big flow event during the receding limb, you'll see big chunks of the bank just kind of carve and fall off. They're marked with spray paint so that we can see what's newly excavated surface. So our hypothesis is that we won't see an increase in the west related to the east branch in terms of the rate of sliding. Here we've got some good data starting from 2013. You'll see that the west branch, there we go, has about double the displacement and delivery than the east branch. And that relationship holds in dry and wet years, which is kind of what we want to see, is that the two branches are behaving in a similar manner. And then after the harvest, if they stop behaving in a similar manner, well then that's what we can attribute to impacts of that harvest. So even in this lean year, that relationship held. Another thing we're looking at is cross-sections. So we're surveying to look at the channel bed and whether there's aggradation or scour. So these red lines are showing the, I lost my cursor, the locations of all the cross sections that are being put in at the mouth, middle, and upper. In addition to cross sections, we have pebble counts. So if there are changes to the bed, we'll pick that up. Predominantly a sand bed channel. The next hypothesis has to do with sediment yield, and a lot of work goes into getting a single number. This is showing the gauging station, where you have a auto sampler and a turbidometer in addition to a pressure sensor. So we're able to get continuous discharge, continuous turbidity, and then grab samples, auto sample taken during the storm events. And the hypothesis, we won't see an increase in turbidity and sediment yield as a result of that harvest. Here's what some of that data looks like. This is for 2014. So we've got a blue line showing discharge, and then in brown, this is the turbidity. So you can see a really flashy system where you have pretty clear water, and then a storm event comes in, and the turbidity shoots up. The other thing that you see here is a really great job of capturing the events with auto samplers. So we have water samples from all of these major events, and we can get the suspended sediment concentration using the gravimetric filtration method. So that's the basis of the sediment budgets. And here's some results. For 2014, we see about 63 metric tons, and 57 on the West Branch. And then about 16% of the time, turbidity exceeds 25 normalized turbidity units. Now I'll show you some data from 2015. Here we had many more large storms. So the stage exceeded 1 meter, whereas in 2014 it never exceeded about 0.6. Again, we've got a really good record, lots of sampling in the storms. The sediment yield increased by 17 times in 2015. And one of the things you'll notice, going back a slide, the turbidity increased dramatically. So here we have 4,500 NTUs, so very, very turbid water. Okay, so a big increase in sediment load. The percent of time turbidity exceeding 25 NTUs doubled from 15 to 16%. And then discharge peak was about threefold increase. We also took grab samples during these storm events. So the idea is to get the main stem above and below where tributaries come in, and then get the tributary as well. And this data was interesting because, in general, the tributaries coming in were cleaner than the main stem they were flowing into. So it suggests a sediment source of debris slides higher up in the watershed, where that turbid water is coming all the way down from the top, or bank erosion being a source of sediment, like the Streamside landslides we saw. The exception was these tributaries 3 and 5. Which had larger watersheds. There are some of the larger tributaries, perhaps large enough to have some bank erosion during big events. The last two hypotheses, we'll be looking at peak flows. And the idea here is to make a plot of peak flow events in the treated and untreated watershed before and after the harvest took place, and see if that relationship shifts. The other thing we'll be doing is using an equation developed for Casper Creek, which would estimate the amount of peak flow alteration you'd expect to see for a certain amount of harvested area, and then we can compare that to any differences we did see. Final method is quite fancy. We took superficial samples and bed samples and shipped them off to Purdue to an accelerator mass spectrometer that's able to read beryllium-10. And we don't have results yet, but the idea is that we'll be able to look at long-term erosion rates over thousands of years and compare that to the types of erosion rates we get from our current study. The idea here is that if you have low erosion rates, then your surface landscape is able to absorb a lot of beryllium-10. And so the sediments that are in the creek will be rich in beryllium-10. If you have a high erosion rate, then the surface materials aren't on the surface long enough to accumulate very much beryllium-10. And so as they erode into the channel, if you were to grab some of those grains of quartz, they would have very little. Oh, that was the slide I was supposed to be showing you. Okay, and this work is being done with Pat Belmont and Ken Ferrier, who are experts in the method. Okay, so in conclusion, we have a multi-year before-after paired watershed approach. We're right in the middle of it. I'm excited that we'll have a long enough time span to be able to account for dry and wet years. We have continuous turbidity and discharge and auto-sampling to get really accurate sediment yields. And then we're also looking at quantifying road erosion, road crossings, streamside landslides, deep-seated landslides, channel down cutting and head cutting. So if we do see a difference in the sediment yields, we're going to be able to have a lot of insight into where that's coming from and what are the mechanisms. So far, the watersheds appear to be tracking really nicely together for various attributes, so I think it's going to be a very good comparison, and we'll capture the changes that occur. Here's a report. Our first annual report has 2014 and 2015 data, and you're welcome to see that. This is on the CAL FIRE website. Looks like I've set a good example, leaving time for questions. Okay.
What was the largest recurrence interval you saw in the calibration period?
The largest recurrence interval within the 2 years. We haven't determined the recurrence intervals. Yeah. Sure, which one? Yeah.
Based on Elk River, the 2016, I think, the third. Based on Elk River, I think 2016 was the third largest event on the 14-year record. So if railroad tracked Elk River, then the 2016 did have a pretty good storm. Recurrence interval unknown.
The February event.
Unknown.
Okay.
It seemed like tributary 3 and 5, just a quick glance at the map, had high road densities compared to the other tribs, and I'm curious if the beryllium analysis could tease out the younger sediment that would come from road.
My impression is that the beryllium-10 is integrating grains of sand that have come from the entire watershed down into the fluvial network. So it wouldn't work at that scale, I think. Yeah.
The beryllium-10 samples, you getting those from the grab samples or just the continuous?
They're taken from the bed of the stream.
Mm-hmm. But isn't there some grab sampling going on in the tributaries?
Yeah, for the grab sampling, we'll be looking at turbidity and just basically comparing turbidity above and below. For example, if you have, at one point we had 4,000 NTUs coming into crossing and 8,000 leaving.
Time for another question. Just wondering how much of a contribution you think the deep-seated landslides might be in the overall long-term sediment budget, and how that will potentially influence your beryllium-10 control.
We have about 6% of the landscape is in landslides of one sort or another. So I think what you're asking is if you were to be moving material that was deeper and hadn't had a chance to accumulate beryllium-10, how would that shift it? Yeah, I'm not sure the answer. Okay. In a way, though, that is telling you you're in an active eroding landscape. Yeah.
I think we'll cut off the questions at that point. Thank you, Andy.
Yeah.